Chapter 23. Chattering like macaws, Miss Seckham's class entered the foyer of the new Stanley Hotel. All the British settlers preferred to stay here in Nairobi's finest hotel. Beryl glanced around at the tall columns and the marble expanse of the lobby, familiar to her from visits with her father. Miss Seckham arranged the annual outing as an opportunity for the girls to practice their social skills at a very ladylike tea. Beryl drew Doss to one side. "Doss, my head itches," she whispered, picking at her mane, which had been tamed into a demure bun. "I told you to wash your hair last night." Doss elbowed her hard. "Beryl, I've been looking forward to this for weeks. If you make a scene, I'll tell Sonny Bumpus you like him." "That shrimp?" "I don't think so." "Then behave." Miss Seckham beckoned the girls to follow her into the dining room, where 3 tables were waiting for them. Beryl hung back, knowing she wouldn't be missed for a few minutes. She slipped into the dark lounge, which was filled with men smoking cigars. The smell of fine whiskey permeated even the upholstered furniture. Reminded of her father's office, Beryl smiled. She walked to the bar and slapped the counter like her father did on their visits to Nairobi. The barkeep looked around and behind her, searching for her chaperone. "You don't belong in here, young lady," he said. "Don't you recognize me?" she asked. "I haven't been here for a long time, but you used to give me fizzy lemonades." The bartender looked closer. Then his face lightened and he smiled broadly. "If it isn't Captain Clutt's daughter." His eyes darted around the room. "Where's the captain?" "I'm here on my own," Beryl confided. "I'm supposed to be in the dining room on a school trip." He winked. "Your secret is safe with me. What can I get you?" "Do you have a newspaper I can look at?" "Certainly." He pulled out a much-read paper from under the bar. Then he poured her a glass of fizzy lemonade. "On the house," he said. Beryl thanked him, sat down on a bar stool and opened the sporting pages. The headline read, "Nighthawk wins the St. Leger Stakes." "The St. Leger? But that's run in mid-September," Beryl said. The racing calendar in England and Nairobi was the only calendar she ever cared about. "Every year," the barkeep agreed. "Nighthawk was the odds-on favourite." "So the race ran already?" Beryl asked. "What day is it?" The bartender laughed. "It's the 16th. I guess they don't teach you about horse racing at that school of yours." Beryl gulped down her sweet drink, said goodbye, and raced out of the lounge into the dining room. Her abrupt arrival drew everyone's eyes. The girls from the school group were sitting at their tables in the corner. Miss Seckham was nowhere to be seen. Beryl rushed over to Doss. "Where did you go?" Doss asked. "Miss Seckham just went looking for you." Beryl shrugged. "Let her. It's my Independence Day." "What are you talking about?" "Actually, it's 2 days past Independence Day. My year was up the day before yesterday. It's time for me to go home." Beryl laughed at herself. "I was so busy trying not to think about how long I had to wait, I lost track of the date." "You're leaving now?" The other girls hung on Beryl's every word. "There's not a moment to waste. The train station is just up the street, right?" Doss nodded, but her face was full of concern. "You can't just leave. Shouldn't you wait for your father to come get you?" "Ha!" Beryl exclaimed, silencing their corner of the busy dining room. "He wouldn't bother. He knows that I'll get home on my own. It's been grand getting to know you. Come visit any time. Goodbye. She turned to leave, but Doss grabbed her wrist. What about your things? She asked. Keep them. Who wants all those scratchy dresses and tight shoes? Beryl said happily. Then a thought struck her. But there is one thing. What? Then Doss remembered the only possession that Beryl cared about. The lion's paw. I have to go back to school to get it. Beryl looked through her battered purse for change to pay for a rickshaw. Oh, bother! I don't have enough money. Can I borrow some? I won't let you take a rickshaw by yourself, Doss said. I'll come too. Beryl was unpinning her bun. She shook out her braids. Doss, I've hunted lions and warthogs. I don't need an escort. I insist, Doss said. Won't you get into trouble? Grinning, Doss shook her head. Not with you to blame, I won't. Beryl shrugged. Suit yourself. We better go before Miss Seckham comes back. Wait for us, one of the other girls said. I don't want to be here when Miss Seckham realises that Beryl has done it again, said another. Before Beryl could protest, the entire class, with the exception of Mary Russell, followed her out of the dining room. Glancing behind her, Beryl couldn't help but compare the colourful procession of girls in fancy dresses wielding purses and parasols to a parade of Nandi warriors. Outside in the street, she commandeered enough rickshaws to carry them all back to the Nairobi School for European Children. Doss sat with Beryl as their driver panted up the hill. Mary must be having a fit, Doss giggled. I'm sure she's told Miss Seckham everything by now. They won't be far behind us. Let them, Beryl said. I won't take long. The 7 girls clattered up the wooden stairs and brushed past the confused servant who opened the front door. They hauled out Beryl's trunk and began to pack it for her. Beryl grabbed her rucksack and went to Miss Seckham's office. The headmistress kept all the contraband locked in a desk drawer. Beryl wasted no time. She forced the lock with her knife. She burrowed through the confiscated items. Liqueur-filled candy, love letters, and Parisian fashion magazines. Finally, she found a cloth bundle she recognized. The paw. She tucked it away carefully in her rucksack. As she returned to the dormitory, she stopped short. Miss Seckham stood in the doorway, her face flushed and angry. Mary hovered behind her. The rest of the girls were standing against the wall as though they were facing a firing squad. Only Doss would meet Beryl's eye. She winked. Beryl Clutterbuck, this is the last straw, Miss Seckham cried. When I found the girls were gone, I knew it was you even before Mary told me. Ever since you arrived, you've been nothing but trouble. She extended one bony finger in blame. It was you who backed up the drains and set fire to the rubbish dump. And don't deny that you put the beetles in my wash basin. Yes, that's right. With her sentence up, Beryl had nothing to lose. If you think I'll tolerate this sort of behaviour at my school, you are sadly... I quit, Beryl interrupted. You are in my care. You cannot quit. Beryl stared at Miss Seckham without troubling to conceal her loathing. I'm leaving on the afternoon train, and you can't stop me. I shall, even if I have to physically restrain you. Miss Seckham slapped Beryl across the face. Doss and Beryl's other friends gasped. Mary stepped back out of reach. Beryl stood motionless. She touched her cheek. Then, as though her hand had a mind of its own, her fingers found the back of Miss Seckham's cotton dress. She lifted the headmistress a few inches off the ground and shook her hard, like a terrier shaking a rat. Miss Seckham's tight hair came undone in bunches. When Beryl dropped her, she sank to the ground. As if a mouse was squeaking, Beryl heard Miss Seckham's voice repeating, "You're expelled! You're expelled!" "You can't expel me. I've already quit," shouted Beryl. "Goodbye, Doss." Abandoning every possession except her rucksack, Beryl stalked out and headed for the train station. Beryl was alone on the train whose whistle had haunted her dreams for the past year. With a sharp, metallic jerk, it began the climb out of Nairobi toward the highlands. Pressing her face against the smeared glass, Beryl stared out at the dusty plains rolling slowly by. Giraffes and herds of antelope were visible in the distance. A rough hand on her shoulder startled her. She banged her forehead on the glass. She whirled to see the conductor, Nelson. As long as she could remember, he had patrolled the length of the train with his rolling gait. He pushed his face down toward hers, and in a hoarse voice he asked, "So, where's your father, Miss Beryl?" His voice rasped from decades of escorting the dusty and smoky train. "I'm to meet him in Nakuru, but it's fine, Nelson. He'll pay for my return ticket," Beryl said, leaning back, away from his tobacco and whiskey breath. "Oh, we don't worry about tickets overmuch with our old friends," he said. "School's not out yet, is it?" "Not exactly. I'm just—" "Running away, are you?" he asked with a knowing grin. "Oh, no," Beryl reassured him virtuously. "I tried that before, but they knew I would go for the train and they caught me at the station. This time I was expelled." Nelson burst out laughing. The sound travelled up and down the car, causing the other passengers to look up to hear the joke. "Your father will have something to say about that. The captain doesn't tolerate people who go against his plans. I remember that time the lad watered the horses too much on the journey down. Unfit to race they were. I thought the captain was going to thrash him right there in the horse car." "He'll understand," Beryl said. "I hope." She thought about the deal she had made with her father. With a shake of her head, she pulled down the window to look out. But she drew back when sparks flew by her face. "Miss Beryl, if you're going to stick your head out, you had better wear these." Nelson handed her a set of goggles. "I'd wager those sparks are from your own father's forest. He supplies the railroad with the wood for the steam engines. We used to have to carry enough wood up to the highlands to make the return trip, but now we just pick it up from him at Nakuru." The train began to climb a steep incline, not as steep as Beryl knew it would be later, and the engine whined in protest. "That fool engineer didn't get enough speed to climb the hill, so we've run out of steam." Beryl chuckled politely, although she had heard Nelson's joke many times. She knew exactly what would happen next. The engineer would back up, let the engine cool, and try again. With a shudder felt through the train, the engine began to reverse. With a relieved hiss, the train began slipping backward down the incline. Nelson sat down beside her. "We'll be waiting for a bit. Did I ever tell you about how I helped build the Lunatic Express?" "Lunatic Express?" Beryl had heard the train called many things, most of them uncomplimentary, but never that. "That's what they called this train. To settle British East Africa, the Crown sold the land cheap. Folks like Lord Delamere and your father were the first to come up, but they needed the train to take their crops back down. The line cost millions of pounds and the lives of hundreds of men. As long as Beryl could remember, the train to Nairobi had been a fact of life, as much taken for granted as the rains in spring. Without it, there were no settlements. She wondered what would Africa be like without the British. If you soared over it like a bird, there would be no roads, no ugly scars of train tracks, no gas-powered lights to cloud the sky and block the stars. Arup Minor probably remembered how it was. But that would be an Africa that had no place for Beryl Clutterbuck. "How did you build it?" Beryl asked. "With British ingenuity," Nelson chuckled. "The engineers were from home, but we imported the labour from India. I was a young man then." He sighed. Looking at his pot belly and thinning hair, Beryl found it difficult to believe he had ever been young. I was a junior assistant surveyor. We would set up camp ahead of the line and then build the track behind us. Those were the days. If only the lions had left us alone." The images of Arup Minor's clawed chest and her punctured leg rose in her mind. The train reached a plateau and slowly came to a halt. "Well, lass, that's our cue. Do you want to step outside? We'll be here for a bit while the engine cools down." Beryl followed the other passengers off the train. They had been travelling for only a few hours, but everyone was already sore and dusty from the journey. As she stretched, a movement in the distance caught her eye. "Is that a lion?" "You've good eyes," Nelson said with approval. "Like I was telling you, lions were a terrible problem when we were laying this track. They would hunt in pairs. More than one man was pulled from his bed. After a while they stopped eating the men, just killed them for the sport." "I've never heard of lions doing that," said Beryl, her forehead crinkled in disbelief. "I swear it's true, Miss Beryl. Those lions were fierce. They outnumbered us. We paid dearly for every mile of track." When the train finally started again, Beryl boarded in a thoughtful mood, considering for the first time the price her father and other settlers had paid for the right to settle in the Highlands. The train made its way upward. It was late morning when it finally gasped its way into Nakuru. "Goodbye, Nelson, and thank you," said Beryl as she hopped off the train before it even stopped. "Miss Beryl, don't you have any luggage?" he called after her. "Don't worry," she shouted as she ran out of the car. "Have a good journey back." She ran out of the station to prevent any more awkward questions. As soon as she was out of sight, she began stripping off the awful clothes. The shoes were the first to go, then the stockings. She sliced off the bottom of the full blue cotton skirt with her knife and wrapped it lengthwise around her body, securing it with a knot at her shoulder, like a shuka. Her blouse and hat she left on the track for anyone foolish enough to want them. Her bare feet protesting at the unaccustomed sensation of stones and dirt, she ran all the way to the Nandi village. The dogs and children greeted her joyfully, but she did not stop to talk. She wanted to see Chibi and Arup Minor. Arup Minor appeared at the doorway to his hut, smiling at the sight of her. "I'm back, Arup Minor," she announced. She wanted to hug him, but she knew his dignity would not permit it. She forced her arms to stay at her sides, contenting herself with a huge grin. "Beru, welcome. Your father thought you would be back a few days ago." "I should have been," Beryl said. She tried to look past Arup Minor into the hut. "Where is Chibi?" She had not seen her friend since he had left for his circumcision ritual, although she had thought of him often. "Chibi is no more, he said solemnly. Beryl caught her breath. You mean? He is now Arup Ruta, said Arup Minor with pride. Relieved, Beryl nodded. Chibi was not dead. He had become a Murani. His new name meant that he had passed his ritual and was now a man. I hoped he would be back by now, said Beryl, hardly trying to conceal her disappointment. Beru, the warriors live by themselves in a separate camp. It is how they develop the bonds of brothers. He has taken his proper place with the tribe. It is what he was born to do. Blinking against the sudden tears in her eyes, Beryl started to turn away. Arup Minor touched her shoulder and said gently, You have grown tall and strong while you were away. It is time for you to join your own people. Go home. But this is my home too, protested Beryl. We shall always be friends. But you are the daughter of Clutterbucky, and he has plans for you. Go see him. Go now. It will not be as hard as you think. Arup Minor disappeared into his hut. Beryl trekked up the hill to the farm, thinking hard. Trapped in Nairobi, she had dreamed of the Nandi. And now the Nandi told her she belonged with the British. Was it truly time to choose? Location: The Ritz-Carlton, New York City, New York. Date: 20th September, 1936. I'm wearing a couture gown, hiking up the long skirt to climb the stairs to yet another banquet in my honour. They are getting dull. Blast, there's another reporter. He's from the New York Times, I think. He's seen me, too, no avoiding another impertinent interview now. I paste on my broadest smile. Beryl, do you have any comment about Tom Black's death? I feel as though I've received a blow to the gut, but I don't show it. Excuse me? The reporter delights in telling me the whole story. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 accident. My dear Tom was taxiing down the runway in a new plane, a tiny Percival Mew. I've heard about this plane, a hairy little beast to fly, but fast. It's only 4 feet tall when it's on the ground. The bomber pilot didn't even see it when he came in for a landing. The bomber's propeller sliced through its cockpit. And Tom, too, like a knife through butter. He died half an hour later. All his skill and experience counted for nothing. I can hardly believe it's true. Choking on my grief, I give the reporter what he wants. England has lost a wonderful pilot, I say. And I have lost the instructor who taught me all I know about flying. I cancel the rest of my engagements and book passage on the first ship back to England. Chapter 24. Beryl walked home the long way, along the edge of the forest. She stopped and peered up into the cedar trees. Through the beards of lichen dripping from the branches, she glimpsed birds swooping among the leaves. She inhaled and exhaled sharply, trying to get the brackish air of the Nairobi swamps out of her lungs. The forest ended sooner than she remembered. Her father had been busy taming the forest, turning it into profit. Bula was lying in the dirt as though he had been waiting patiently for a year. Hi, boy, she said, fondling his scarred ears and rubbing under his chin. His tail thumped and with a wheezing noise he stood and followed her down to the lower paddock. As she hoped, her father was putting the Baron through his paces. If he was not too busy, the captain loved to ride after the day's work was done. Beryl walked into the paddock, her chin up, head held high. She was uneasily conscious of her makeshift shooka. Whoever heard of a toga made out of a skirt? The captain saw her, reined in the Baron, and waited for her to close the distance between them. Horse and master were silhouetted against the setting sun. Thankfully, Emma was nowhere to be seen. Beryl's stomach fluttered as though she had swallowed a nest of wasps. But despite her nerves, she couldn't help savouring the feel of the damp, packed earth of the paddock under her bare feet. As she placed each step, she rolled from heel to toe. It was a stretch that reminded her feet of all the liberties they had once known. She told herself to agree to anything her father proposed, anything to keep her feet out of those dreadful shoes. Finally, there was no more space between them. The captain's face was impassive. The Baron chomped noisily on his bit. Now that she was here, all her words, so carefully planned on the train, deserted her. "Beryl," the captain said non-committally. "Daddy?" She tried to show him her resolve without looking defiant. "You lasted longer than I thought you would." "We agreed on a year. I lasted a year and 2 days," she said. Looking down from his horse, the captain's grey eyes challenged her to be more truthful. "I did run away earlier, but they caught me at the station." He leaned forward interrogatively. "Twice," she admitted. "I know. The headmistress wrote to Emma." His eyes narrowed, and his hand tightened on his reins. "And now? Are you absent without leave?" The military term came easily to his lips. "Oh no, Daddy," Beryl assured him. "I was expelled." After a moment she added doubtfully, "Honourably expelled?" His hands lost some of their tension and he nodded. "Yes, I thought you might be." "Well, really I quit a moment before that awful woman threw me out." Captain Clutterbuck burst out laughing. Taking a deep breath and placing all her hopes in her voice, Beryl implored, "Daddy, don't make me go back. I hated it." "I didn't send you to enjoy yourself. I sent you to get an education." He paused. He was as honest as his daughter. "And to get you out of harm's way." "It's a lot more dangerous down there. You have no idea how complicated the other girls were." He chuckled. "Oh, my dear, I've known for many years how complicated girls can be." "But I've grown up a lot." She paused. "Can I come back if I promise to behave with Emma?" "Just with Emma?" His eyes were twinkling. Beryl's nervousness began to fade. "Definitely with her, and I'll try to behave the rest of the time." He waited. "I'll try hard." Suddenly the captain relaxed too. He dismounted smoothly and enveloped her in a large hug. "Darling, I've missed you. It's been dull without you here." Beryl said nothing, too busy savouring his unexpected welcome. Her father put his strong hands on her shoulders and pushed her back a step. Her eyes were level with his. "Let me look at you. You've grown at least 2 hands." "I'm not a horse," she protested happily. He chuckled. "So I can come home?" "If you agree to my conditions." She began to nod eagerly, but in a burst of caution she asked, What do you have in mind? No more larking about with Chibi, he said. That won't be hard. He's a warrior now. He doesn't want anything to do with me, she said sadly. So Chibi is growing up, is he? Good. So will you. She watched him warily, shifting from one bare foot to the other. I'm expanding the farm all the time. I can't run the stables without a head lad. Are you interested in the job? You want me to be head lad? She couldn't keep the hopeful disbelief out of her voice. Can you do it? He asked. His voice was that of a commanding officer offering an ensign a vital assignment in wartime. Beryl remembered he had used the same tone when he suggested she ride Camiscan for the first time. Of course I can! Suddenly her future looked brighter. And you can't live in that rondarville. That back wall isn't safe. I have to live with you and Emma. I've got something else in mind. He pointed across the paddock, up the hill to the house. Next to his house stood a new house. An adorable cottage with gables and 3 windows. Even from here she could see it was twice the size of her rondarville, and had at least 2 rooms. There were even proper shingles, not thatch, for a roof. Do you like it? He asked, smiling. It's for me? For you, he confirmed. Emma insisted that if you are to have a proper job with me, you need a proper home. He grinned. But not under her roof. Beryl remembered the catty remarks she had heard from Margaret, and how rude Miss Seckham had been to Emma. Her position, neither wife nor housekeeper, was a difficult one. She must be lonely, Beryl said. Perhaps I should be nicer. A quizzical look appeared on her father's face. What did they do to you at that school? I lived with 7 other girls for a year, Daddy. Enough said. He laughed. If you and Emma could declare a truce, my life would be easier. A job with the horses. My own house. No hunting. Stop tormenting Emma. Is that all? A bit of his stern manner returned. And for God's sake, put on some decent clothes. Agreed. Beryl gave her father another hug. His arm draped around her shoulder. They began walking toward the stable. Beryl knew that her father would not retract his offer, so it was safe to ask, Daddy, why now? You said before I couldn't work in the stable. The most practical reason is that the school costs a fortune for an education you don't need. His voice was rueful. After all, I can't see you going to university in England. Beryl nodded. Secondly, I'm so busy with the mill, I need someone to keep an eye on the stable. I have almost 100 thoroughbreds here, the whole bloodstock of British East Africa. Finally, you want the job, and I want you to be happy. Beryl would have preferred her happiness be at the top of his list, but she wouldn't complain about the result. So it's time to put you to work, the captain said, returning to his usual brisk style. Do you remember Coquette? Daddy, I went away to school, not the moon. Of course I remember. The golden Abyssinian mare with a white mane. She's due to foal soon. Who's the stud? Camiscan? No, a new stallion. Referee. It promises to be a good foal. He paused. Coquette is your responsibility. Beryl felt light-headed. Daddy, I've never birthed a foal. Coquette has never had a foal either. First things aren't always easy. You both will learn. 10 long days later, Coquette was finally ready. Beryl was alone in the stall with her and stroked the mare's nose with pity. Coquette's golden coat was tarnished, and her eyes were dull. She was so full of new life that it had sucked her own vitality out of her. You will be beautiful again, Beryl said to her, as soon as this is finished. A hurricane lamp burned on its hook in the corner, well away from the straw. Why are foals always born in the middle of the night? Emma's voice startled Beryl. She whirled around to see Emma holding a plate covered with a cloth. I don't know, Beryl admitted, but they always are. I brought you something to eat, Emma said. Thank you. Beryl turned back to Coquette. Beryl, I know we haven't always got along, but I wanted to tell you how happy I am that you are home. Your father missed you very much. Beryl was silent, and after a few moments, she heard Emma's footsteps moving off. Coquette made a groaning noise. Her labour had started. Beryl whistled for the stable lad who would help her. To her surprise, Arthur, not so little now, came running. What are you doing here? She asked, not taking her eyes from Coquette. Dad thought I should watch. Get the kit, she ordered. He came back at a run with her foaling bag, which contained knives, twine, disinfectant, and even anaesthetic. Beryl could not help the mare yet, but she could keep her company. Arthur sat in the corner and watched, his eyes wide. After what felt like hours, Coquette's eyes seemed a little brighter. It was time. Beryl knelt beside her, waiting for the first glimpse of the foal in its sack. She could see the tiny hooves. The foal's legs were gathered together to ease its way into the world. Gently, Beryl pulled as Coquette pushed. The nose, the head, and at last the whole foal slipped out of Coquette and into Beryl's arms. Arthur handed Beryl her knife, and she slit open the birth sack. The foal's tiny nostrils sucked air for the first time. Beryl pulled the sack away from its body and cut the cord. She bathed the cord with disinfectant. She saw now that the foal was a colt. Coquette lurched to her feet and, with listless eyes, looked down on her son. She and Beryl washed him together. Coquette with her long tongue, Beryl with a towel. Beryl heard a cough behind her and turned to see her father. The proud look on his face was the only thing that could top the night's triumph. Well done, he said. Beryl did a great job, didn't she, Dad? Arthur chimed in. She did. He's a fine colt. Shall I reward you or Coquette? Or both? It was Coquette who did all the work, Beryl said. Ah, but it's you who will get the reward. You brought him into the world. He's yours, her father said. Wow! Arthur exclaimed. Beryl, the next time you run away, you can ride. I won't be leaving again, Beryl assured them. Everything I want is here. After Beryl and Arthur had cleaned up the foaling box, she left him to watch over the mother and newborn. Beryl sat against the wall of her new house, looking up at the bright stars in the sky. After a time, she heard the faint sounds of someone approaching from the forest. She smiled to herself and waited until the near silent figure approached her cottage. Hello, Chibi, she said in Swahili. He was very solemn, and in the bright starlight, Beryl could see that he was feeling very full of himself. The Nandi made such a fuss of new warriors that it was hard not to get a swelled head. Chibi's skull was freshly shaved, and she could see the ochre paint in intricate designs on his body. "Yes, Beru, it is I. But you are no longer Chibi. I am Arap Ruta," he said with pride. The R sound came out as smooth and soft as feathers on the lip. "I am a Murani now," he said simply. "Congratulations," she said solemnly. He asked curiously, "Why are you looking up so seriously? What is there to see but sky?" "When I was in Nairobi, I thought the stars were different there. But it is the same sky. It was me who was different. Now that I am back, I see that the constellations did not change. Maybe it is the same sky everywhere. Maybe even in London. We are not birds or bats to worry about the sky. But think of it. If you were a bird, you could go from one place to another without using roads, railroad tickets, or papers. It wouldn't matter if you were in Africa or Europe. Or if you were a white girl, or I, a Nandi warrior. Exactly. Beru, my father always said you had clouds in your eyes." They were silent as they contemplated the night sky. Beryl wondered what it was about talking under the stars that made you feel so solemn and wise. Chibi broke the silence. "I hear the mare birthed a fine colt." "Yes. My father gave him to me." "What will you name him?" "That is why I was looking up at the sky. I was trying to think of the perfect name. I was thinking, perhaps, Pegasus." "Pegasus?" Chibi could not get his tongue around the unfamiliar name. "He is a winged horse out of one of our stories. A winged horse that heroes rode." "Like the cans of paraffin?" Beryl laughed out loud as she realized that Chibi was right. The fuel cans that all the settlers used had a winged red horse emblazoned on the side with the motto, "Pegasus, the spirit of mileage and power." She giggled. "Yes, like the fuel cans." "It's a good name," conceded Chibi. "So is yours, Arap Ruta. I came to say goodbye." "I know." Beryl's heart was full with many emotions. She grieved for the loss of Chibi, but she was happy for Arap Ruta. "Goodbye for now, or forever?" she asked. For a moment, she glimpsed Chibi in the eyes of the dignified Arap Ruta. "For now, I owe my life to the tribe. And I must help my father. Someday, we will be friends again," he said, and melted away quicker than he had come. "It's a promise," she whispered after him into the night.
This has been an Audible Inc. production of Promise the Night, written by Michaela McCall, narrated by Elizabeth Jasicki. Producer Mike Charzik. Copyright 2011 by Michaela McCall. Production copyright 2013 by Audible Inc.
This audio program is presented by Audible.com. Audible, audio that speaks to you wherever you are. This audio program is